Where is all this going? Joining me now at the desk is Steve Clemons from the New America Foundation. Steve, thanks very much for coming in.
Great to be with you, Bob.
So the protesters say this is the day of departure. They clearly wanted this to be the day that Mubarak stepped down. Where do you see this going?
Well, I still see a train wreck ahead, because what the protesters want is to see not only Mubarak leave, but they want to see regime change, and they want to see their representatives that are going to be diverse part of the next game. But on our side, and I would say where Mr. Suleiman, the vice president, and others have been, is more regime adjustment than regime change. And those are different things. And we'll have to see if the public's expectations will eventually tolerate the various packages that might be possible that the current incumbent government might roll out.
Suleiman is the longtime intel chief there.
Yes.
Now he's the vice president. Do we want him, does the U.S. want him to be kind of an agent of change, kind of help in the transition?
Yes, we do. The United States wants to see the military and the intelligence establishment remain both a foundation and a fair arbiter of other interests that will come into government, but to maintain that backbone of order and stability with which we have very good relations. And so that is part of our game plan, is to try to convince the public that stepping forward and somehow at least having outreach and inclusion in a fair and free election down the road will be enough to simultaneously solve the expectations that we have, that Egyptians have, but not throw the country into total chaos.
Does Suleiman have the credibility with the people as enough of an agent of change to be effective in that role, or will they just not accept that?
To be quite honest with the people I've been speaking to, I don't believe so. I think that Suleiman is one who appeals to more of the establishment, more of those people who've done well under Mubarak, not the half of the population who've been left behind by Egypt and are living at poverty or sub-poverty levels and don't feel as if that they've been politically terrorized for 30 years as opposed to part of the government that's serving them.
Whatever happens over there, I think it's important from the administration's perspective that this not be the American plan, because that's just not saleable.
I think that's right. Well, I think that what's interesting is President Obama came out at the beginning wanting this to be about principles, embracing the universal right of people to assemble, to protest, to speak, calling against any form of violence, and I think to some degree that was violated the other day, and then encouraging the government to move expeditiously yesterday, as Bob Gibbs said, towards some form of serious political reform. Now, with the frustration, you see on one hand Mubarak's people and Suleiman think that they are responding to Obama and to the West and other leaders that are calling, and the things that they're doing are historic in their mind, but just on a different clock. We're very frustrated, and every time Mubarak or Suleiman gives a speech, we say not enough, and this isn't happening fast enough, because we see the size of the protests in the street, and we see the expectations of the public calling for something new and different. What is not happening, in my view, and I think one of the things the White House has been advocating for, is the immediate appointment of some kind of stewardship council that would very obviously include opponents of the previous regime in a working and empowered relationship to play a stewardship role until you get to elections. That hasn't happened yet.
So the administration has endorsed the idea of change. They want it to happen now.
Right.
That kind of plays with the protesters, but do we know what that's going to look like, and what's the risk going forward? If you remove the authoritarian regime of Mubarak, what comes in behind that?
Well, I think it's going to be very open. We don't know. We've got lots of groups, the Muslim Brotherhood. We have lots of other groups beyond the Muslim Brotherhood, but the Muslim Brotherhood is the next best organized entity behind the army in the country, and so it hits above its weight. You have a lot of other institutions that would like to form, but they're new. They haven't been operating as a functioning political party. And then you have what's not often discussed in the media, lots of rules about who can vote, who can't vote, what parties can participate, which have been banned. And each of these has to be changed or removed if you're going to stay within this legal construct of the current Constitution and the current political order. If you throw it out, what do you have? You've got an incredible mess. So a lot of the establishment want to give away visibly as much as they can in the optics to the opposition at the moment, because they know they can come back and get into legal wrangling about what the sources of legal justification are, or what the powers of the president versus the parliament are, and legally strangle reform. And I think that's where the next real set of collisions will happen in Egypt. And I think the White House is aware of that, but frankly, we often overstate what our influence is. I think our influence at a certain point is at the edges and much more nuanced than people know.
Is it inevitable in your mind that the Muslim Brotherhood is going to have some kind of role here? And
Absolutely.
And if they do, what kind of problems does that portend for us potentially?
Well, I tend to be one that thinks the Muslim Brotherhood is a group that over the years has evolved away from contacts years ago with terrorists and has become more of a responsible political party and agent. They've been very smart, very savvy. They have wrapped themselves into the principles of democracy, talked about respect for minority rights. There are various convenings of Muslim Brotherhood representatives from around the Middle East in Doha every once in a while, and you see a lot of differences among them. And Peter Bergen, a colleague of mine at the New America Foundation and a real expert in this area, has been out very publicly saying it's time for us to engage that. But it doesn't mean that Muslim Brotherhood will take a majority of the government. It means that Muslim Brotherhood will probably be represented. It would have to be, probably at about a third of the electorate and a third of the system. So we need to figure out an engagement strategy that doesn't defer and appease, particularly some of the disconcerting objectives of the Muslim Brotherhood. But we have to get over our phobia, because our phobia makes us do things that in the minds of other Egyptians looks undemocratic. So looks like we're continuing to propel a Mubarak tweaked regime as opposed to a very different kind of regime.
The idea that some people may have that links the Muslim Brotherhood to characters like Ayman al-Zawahiri, right, the second in command al-Qaeda guy. That's not who they are now?
No, they're not. Muslim Brotherhood very clearly is not tied to al-Qaeda, dropped any connection to al-Qaeda years ago. If it ever had them. But there is another story there, that there are people like Ayman al-Zawahiri, Ali Khamenei, the leader of Iran, who were imprisoned and allegedly tortured in Egypt. Khamenei alleges that the CIA was in the room. There is going to be a set of files that eventually come forward on atrocities, detentions, disappearances, and torture. And I fear that America will be complicit in some of this in the past. And one of the things we need to worry about is what the decisions we make today, that President Obama is making, the markers he's putting out about principles of how this process needs to move forward, that it doesn't look like we're acquiescing again to a thuggish regime because of interest that won't give us at least the rights to basically say we ourselves have changed and are no longer in those complicit in some of Egypt's nightmares.
So just by way of summary then, you're suggesting, I think, that whatever rises up as a democratic government of Egypt, if it is to be that,
right,
we have to accept that. We can't have.
We need to embrace it. We need to try and encourage all parties to respect democratic principles. And President Obama and his team have been saying that. They have been saying we would like to see the Muslim Brotherhood play a role if they will respect democratic principles, the rights of minorities, the rights of diversity, the rights of women. And basically move on that front. And I think the administration will stick to that line. And it has talked very openly in meetings I've been about an inclusivity of the Muslim Brotherhood. That doesn't mean they're going to be our best friends or we expect it to go easy, but I do expect the United States to pivot in a direction as it takes a look not just at Egypt, but at the rise of political Islam, that we need something other than building big walls. We need to figure out how do you begin engaging the better parts of these movements and separate them from the worst parts of these movements.
All right, Steve Clemons from the New America Foundation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.